Hello everyone. This is our fifth episode of Our World Heritage Talks. If you missed the previous editions, you can always check them at the Our World Heritage YouTube channel. There is a special playlist dedicated to our talks. My name is Maria Sigüencia, and today I have the pleasure to share this talk with two members of this initiative. They are both part of the advisory committee. I would like to welcome Minja and Kay van Damme, who will be today with us sharing their thoughts and perspectives. Minja is President and Professor Emeritus of the Remont-le-Mer International Center for Conservation and the former Director of the Center at KU Leuven in Belgium. In addition, she completed 30 years at the UN and UNESCO, where she served as Deputy Director of the World Heritage Center and part of the UNESCO New Delhi office. Kay van Damme is a biologist at Ghent University in Belgium, specialized in freshwater faunas and nature conservation of subtropical areas around the world. He has experience in over 20 years of biodiversity research and conservation in the fragile Socotra archipelago, Yemen's only natural World Heritage Site. He has helped to advise the World Heritage Committee and IUCN in relation to nature and heritage sites in developing countries. So we have a common country here where you both have been and playing still a crucial role. That's Belgium. And if I can add to that, I also feel part of the crew since I developed my studies at the Remont-le-Mer Center. So let's get started. The dynamic would be that I will make a question. I will ask you both to interact with this question. So the first one is that after this short introduction, I will ask you to go more in depth and introduce yourself and tell us how you became involved and interested in being part of the All World Heritage Initiative. So yeah, let's get started. Minja, with you, please.
Okay, good. Thank you. As Mary mentioned, I survived 30 years in the UN. I'm a development sociologist by training. So my take on heritage has always been from the point of view of identity. And the fact that I'm half Japanese and half Korean was also, the question of identity was always very deeply rooted in my thinking. So the first 10 years at the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, where people leave their country and are, especially when they're resettled in the third country, they are lost. I mean, they've just lost the perimeters of their identity. And then for 20 years at UNESCO, primarily at the World Heritage Center, first dealing with Asia Pacific and then later as deputy director and also dealing with information. So all of this, my 20 years in UNESCO left me with a rather bitter feeling about the way in which the World Heritage Convention was being implemented. I mean, it's a great convention, but the way it was being implemented, I had a lot of problems about it. So when our World Heritage Initiative began, I joined very quickly some of my colleagues to start this thing. And then I was very thrilled that a lot of young people or younger generation people are now taking over this whole movement, because I think that's really where it needs to go. So that's sort of the reason why I joined our World Heritage.
Thanks, Minja. What about you, Kay?
Thank you, Maria. I got involved with Our World Heritage through Ms. Haifa Abdul Halim, who is a nature expert from the Arab region, and we worked before, for example, in Yemen on the Socotra archipelago, where I've been working for 20 years before it became a World Heritage Site. And as a biologist from Belgium, I felt, I felt in UNESCO that there's a smaller amount of nature sites and also nature experts in general, And therefore, there is also a need for more voices related to nature. So this was also in Our World Heritage from the start to have some people involved who really care and who really are interested in nature and the nature side. But as an academic expert, I became involved in UNESCO World Heritage sites, to particularly one site in Yemen, where I worked for really long, and then I saw the evolution of the place before it became a World Heritage site and after, and then really got really interested in the World Heritage Initiative because it seems to really push for stronger civil society voices, louder civil society voices, more participation from the ground, and perhaps a more practical thing than more theoretical talks. So this is really, I'm here mainly with the green flag up to promote also nature conservation within the initiative.
Yeah, it's terrific to have you both on board with such interesting and diverse backgrounds. We have the chance to reflect about the natural and the cultural sides, and we would like to hear about that today and the exact interplay of the two fields, and how can we raise the importance of this interaction throughout the initiatives, and especially the All World Heritage one. So first, let us know about your perception about the definitions and limits of cultural natural heritage. From your experience, are there clear limits between cultural and natural heritage? How do you perceive it? So you want to start, Kay?
Thank you, Maria. From my perspective, the separation between cultural and natural heritage is rather arbitrary, depending on the place and context. So, for example, in development areas or development countries, nature and culture are not necessarily separated. In the nature side, culture will play a huge role, and especially intangible culture. And the same for actually many cultural sites which are in open areas and play a huge role in the landscape and in the people's perception of the landscape. And these both have evolved with each other. This is less the case, for example, in development countries. For example, I don't see much nature on a church. Mostly they take off the plants that grow on the walls. But I'm really talking about the interaction between both, especially in areas where both have developed in concert and where it's become part of the human landscape. And I think it's very important to understand that the separation between both might be very arbitrary in these regions. And this is also the areas where I mostly work, where culture is extremely important as part of a nature site and vice versa. And we very often forget this component. For example, in Socotra Island, the local language really describes the nature of the place. And with the endangered, the fact that the language is endangered, actually it endangers the nature of the site. And this is not taken into account, for example, in the OUV, which is only about the number of species and habitats that are unique in the island. So I think there is, besides talking about really mixed places, I think within nature sites and development countries, there is more cultural components than we might see perceive at first.
Yeah.
No, I
Minja.
totally agree with what Kai says, because really for me, as I said, because of my whole background in development sociology, to me, an identity, in order for the formation of a person's identity, and also for cultural sites as well as for nature, it's totally artificial to separate it. For me, it's totally integrated. Because, I mean, speaking of, Kai mentioned the word human landscape, and I think that's really where we start from, because a person since birth is really surrounded by its environment, which is both physical, cultural, and physical nature. And then, of course, how the society deals with these various points, And so I think, so this is why when I started working on the World Heritage Convention, I mean, those, 6 cultural criterias, as well as the 4 natural criterias, to me, it was like very, like, it was more the way in which the experts were actually implementing and advising on the convention, where I think that the crevasse, the division it was further pronounced in some ways. And of course, later, with more environment consciousness because of the whole environment movement, the nature-culture link was further, was given greater importance. But I think that we do need to look at the way in which the convention is actually being implemented for that, you know. And I mean, of course, the convention isn't everything. So this is why our World Heritage work of involving the civil society is very important, because governments are not going to, you know, promote the nature-culture link. I mean, even if all the conventions that they sign, you know, says that, but in terms of the implementation, for them, it's so much more practical if they just separate. This is for, you know, this site is inscribed for so-and-so criteria, and that site is inscribed for so-and-so natural criteria. You know, they don't want to mix things, because for them, that creates greater management issues, you see. So, but really, I totally agree. I think it's completely artificial to separate the nature and culture.
Thanks, Minja. It's really nice, the analogy you made to for human beings also having this cultural and natural side. It's really nice. So let's continue talking about this, but at level of management. How does it have is work for natural and cultural heritage? Do you foresee an interplay in management processes?
When you're working in UNESCO, your major counterpart are the governments, right? So you're working on the natural heritage sites with the Ministry of the Environment, Ministry of the Environment generally, and then you're also working with for cultural sites uniquely with the Ministry of Culture. And of course, there's a foreign ministry somewhere up there, but they're not the technicians. So in terms of the preparation of the nomination dossier, you know, we were more involved. In fact, the World Heritage Center staff are not really supposed to be involved with the nitty-gritty of the nomination process. But because I was working in developing countries, you know, so mainly in the beginning in Asia Pacific and later more in Africa. But so my counterparts were people from the developing countries. So even trying to explain the operational guidelines, you know, I had a lot of problems with the whole sort of, you know, nature and culture divide, because your interlocutors were different. So I think that, you know, we really, the World Heritage Center in ICOMOS and IUCN staff or consultants who are in the front line of contacts with the government need to integrate that nature-culture link better so that the governments will understand. Especially now that the World Heritage Convention is being tied up increasingly for very good cause with the Sustainable Development Goals. So how can you, you know, just deal with a World Heritage cultural site as though it was some kind of an object? We're not all, even if we're only talking about single monuments, you know, you're talking about single monuments in the context of a human landscape and what these religious edifices or monumental structures mean to the overall society surrounding it. So I think that, you know, the first thing that I think we experts need to really review our nature culture position. And then so at the management level, I think that, you know, there needs to really be a much greater integration of the World Heritage Convention with the UN, with the Sustainable Development Goals. In terms of management, the division, the management, at the management level, this nature cultural link is definitely divided. Also because of the government administration and because of the experts that UNESCO, ICOMOS, IUCN sent. They are just too much separated. So I think the first thing, as I said, is to, at the level of the experts, for them to understand the nature culture link better and for them to internalize the whole World Heritage Convention as one of the tools for the Sustainable Development Goals. I think it's only through that this artificial division at the management level can be resolved. And of course, by greater involvement of the stakeholder communities in general. But that's another big issue of communities, a big separate issue that needs discussion. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to I would like to pick up on the last thing that Minja just said. So I think it's very important what you just said, and I think the involving communities is one of the ways forward to solve some of these issues. One of the problems is that very often management is done by people who actually do not actually live in the site specifically, but by people who are in a management position, either from higher up in government, very often from an entirely different area, perhaps even speaking a different language, and from a different background, not connected to the values of the site, and therefore not actually understanding the entire process of importance of conservation or preservation of the site. And therefore, the real management is always done by the actual local communities living on the areas, whereas on paper, the management is done by a governmental management unit. But in practice, and this also comes down to several places being sometimes under threat, is by putting too much emphasis on the management unit that is not really managing, right, and ignoring the management unit on the ground that is actually managing. So there is some need to bridge, especially for nature culture sites, that you know, the let's say landscape. I mean, there is a definition for UNESCO landscape, human landscape sites, but I mean, in general, those places that where land and people have converged into a beautiful natural environment, which is always with human, there's always a human touch. Almost no natural environments are entirely natural. They always have some human touch, whether directly or indirectly. And they're acknowledging the importance of local communities and in management. I think this is really important, and this could help bridge that gap in these kind of areas. That's what I think.
True. But also in terms of the World Heritage Committee decisions, obviously the decisions that are actually drafted by the ICOMOS, IUCN experts together with UNESCO, because I mean there's a site in Rajasthan, you know, it's a wetland, and because of the irrigation work that was done, the flow, natural flow was actually stopped, so the wetlands dried up, and possibility of the site being put on the list in danger, etc. And so the committee actually advised that more water flow be rediverted back into the wetlands, which is fine. But at the same time, this entailed further infrastructure work that would deny the local communication of the local community of the water for irrigation, water for their livelihood. So I mean, even the experts that make these recommendations, they don't understand, or they don't actually take into consideration the overall impact and the implication of the recommendations. And that's very dangerous, But this is not to say, again, that you have to do everything only for the local community, because this is where the pedagogy becomes important. How, our work at UNESCO, I always said that UNESCO's principal work is to make the governments understand the multidimensionality of a particular conservation issue, but also bringing in the human factor involved as well. And during the course of my career at the World Heritage Center, there are state governments who have actually criticized me, saying like I was dealing with social housing issues in Istanbul, because that was the only way to get the Kurdish immigrants living in Istanbul in a Greek and Jewish surrounding to respect the heritage. Because why should a Kurd refugee or a nature, in fact, he was a nature displacement, he came to Istanbul in order to to flee the area which was totally flooded, right? So he came to Istanbul. They come to Istanbul and they don't care about the Greek and Jewish heritage of this area called Fatih. And so we started getting involved, or I started getting involved in social housing, getting extra budgetary funds from the European Union and all that. And I was actually criticized by a state party saying, you are going beyond your mandate. I mean, I actually left the podium to cry. I went to cry in the toilet, you know, of the hotel where we were having a conference, because I said, this is ridiculous. Here I am. I just went crazy trying to get the funding for it. 7 million euros that we got from the EU for that particular project of social housing. And instead of being, you know, I wasn't necessarily asking for them to praise me, but it was a way of trying to make the committee understand the integrated nature of conservation and development. But so I think from that point of view, I mean, the committee has gone a long way, and there's a better understanding of the integration of conservation and development, and hence also nature and culture as well.
Yes, Gay, tell us.
Yeah, I think and I think that's where our World Heritage can really play a role, to be honest, to voice more the civil societies, and to look into these issues where people feel there is a gap and there's a need, and to voice these things. And from all our perspective and from what I've seen, our World Heritage is full of really passionate people, really caring about World Heritage in general, but also always having a specific site in mind where they have very similar experiences, whether it's culture or nature, feeling similarly about certain things and really wanting to do something. And that momentum I felt since the beginning of our World Heritage is really moving, and I think is engaging more and more people, and I think is therefore already being quite impactful by just creating this momentum and these kind of talks, like this talk as well. I never had this amount of and this level of talks with people from the culture side, because in UNESCO they're quite separated. I mean, even at the committee meeting, it is relatively separated. In this case, in our World Heritage, the voices are joined together and people are talking and exchanging experiences and comparing the tools for assessment and all of these things. And I think that's very, very insightful, and we're constantly learning from each other. Minja is a sociologist, so she's looking at it from a human perspective. I'm a biologist looking at it from a nature perspective, and just us, I mean, me just listening to her, it's very interesting to understand from a sociologist perspective, looking at culture and nature sites, looking at the human, you use the word pedagogy, for example, really looking at the education side, and it's very, very important, I think. And these are aspects that mostly either as experts or people in management really forget, because we're fixing on this either one OUV or one management issue, but not looking at the larger context in the entire, let's say, the entire ecosystem, including everything, you know, the air, the people, the whole thing.
No, because now, of course, all this talk about the community as well. I mean, okay, we all agree that you have to involve the local communities, particularly the local inhabitants, as well as the so-called stakeholders of people, you know, hotel owners, tourism industry. I mean, these are all stakeholders that determine the future of a particular site. So fine, but at the same time, there's such a simplification in terms of the approach of community involvement. You know, apart from the scholars who write scholarly articles that dissected the differentiation of the local community, the majority is, you know, bottom up, community. But how do you expect the community to really engage if there isn't that pedagogy first, the didactic transmittal of the scientific knowledge of how the site needs to be preserved? And so this is where the scientist that you are, Kai, is very important. And I think too many, I'm not talking, I shouldn't sound, I don't want to sound as though that I'm against scholars, because scholars have a very important role to play. but there needs to be scholar activists, scholar experts who actually come to the field, you see. And again, very often it's divided, you know. The nature experts and the culture experts are selected mainly who in order to really advance their own scientific publications, I hate to say. So this is why also, you know, a lot of the experts that are sent out there are concerned more about their own publication instead of actually doing something for the local community. So I mean, I have a lot of problems, but how to begin to make things right is a long process.
And it starts by expressing them. I think this is a platform where people can express it so freely. So I think that's one of the ways to start, is to just express and acknowledge. Yeah. I think this is definitely the case, that people are promoting either their own academic work and something, and sometimes it actually, by doing so, compete and then have actually a negative impact on the site, because they are competing for the funding for the site. And this also I have seen. So this is really, these things happen. Right, Maria, you had more questions for us, I think, right?
Yeah, it's been really enriching, all this information that you gave us, and exactly, I think you've already touched all the topics that were expected to be in this talks today. We have talked about community-based, community-driven, and you even went beyond and thinking about what is the exact role that we are all playing, and that we should be playing more, as Minja said, as activism in the field. I think we will have the chance progressively to do more things on the field, and that would be great as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. It has been really interesting to have this both-sided experience. We would like to keep contributing through the OurWorldHeritage initiative with a better understanding and implementation of actions, of real actions that work for cultural and natural heritage together. So this is just the start. I will just give the floor for final words of you two. So if you want to give some final words, Minja.
No, go ahead, Kai, start while I think.
So final words. Many thanks, Maria and Minja, for this conversation. I think it's always very interesting to have, and very very educational, very engaging as well, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm happy that through OurWorldHeritage there is also more attention on the interplay between nature and culture, and the importance of both in World Heritage sites. And perhaps by repeating that importance of that connection, OurWorldHeritage can play a much longer lasting, sustainable role in time in protecting these connections. And I hope that would be one of the goals in the long term of the initiative. And I'm really happy and really proud to be part of it. So from my side, meeting people like you and meeting other people in the initiative has been very enriching and very nice. So I'm just very grateful, and I really hope we can engage more people from on the ground actively. And we are trying to do this through other initiatives within OurWorldHeritage, that we are reaching out to at least several people on the ground to engage into the community, to see how we can have the voices even more from the local people. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Yes, Minja?
Yeah, well, in terms of, because I would like to just say one thing. I mean, local community, local inhabitants are a must. You cannot conserve a site without them, number one. But it should be a bottom up and top down. Top down because laws, guidelines are things that are necessary in a society. You cannot have a functioning society without some certain rules. So that's the top-down part of it. But the bottom-up part of it is really a whole sociological approach to the problem. So the decision makers also have to be trained, be educated to understand the sociological aspect of conservation. And then the community also has to be educated in for a better understanding of the scientific aspect of conservation. So I think this whole bottom up, top down merge is what would also make the nature culture link better promoted and managed. Thanks.
Yeah.
So anyway, also I agree with Kai that this Our World Heritage initiative is really great because it really allows an intergenerational dialogue, you know, because I mean, how often, I mean, I happened to spend 11 years at university after 30 years in the UN. So I had an opportunity to dialogue with a younger generation, but most people are just not only caught in their own scientific discipline or their professional circle, but they're also cut off from intergenerational dialogue in many ways. So I think that all of these barriers need to be, you know, looked at, and a greater dynamic between these different barriers need to be promoted. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much for making this possible. I mean, this interplay of actors and disciplines, it's been great talk with you both. So thank you very much. And thank you also to all the subscribers of our news, our World Heritage newsletter. Keep watching the upcoming episodes of our World Heritage Talks. And do not forget to follow the activities of the 2021 debates. Every month there is a new topic. So take care and see you all next time. Thank you.